Good morning, guys. Sorry to keep you waiting. So this is about getting access with spearfishing. I became interested in spearfishing because it's such a powerful attack vector and it's a fun mix of social engineering and technical skill. So I'm Kevin. Like you said, I'm a network security analyst. I'm a Macaulay Brown. We do defense contracting. I really like offensive security, but offense is defense and defense is offense. So hopefully by learning how to spearfish, you guys can better defend against it. So just to prove I'm not a robot, I also like nature, video games, and DIY projects. I don't really have a Twitter, so here's my GitHub. And the opinions are my own and not the company's. So unless if you've been living under a rock, I'm sure you heard of what spearfishing is. Basically, it's a targeted form of phishing that includes your name, your company, relevant information, and might impersonate someone you know. And basically, it's going to be really hard to distinguish from legitimate email. And humans are the weakest link in the chain for security, so that's why spearfishing is implicated in the vast majority of data breaches. Um, Generally, even among a trained staff, people report a 10 to 40% success rate when doing spearfishing. So that's pretty significant because if you have like 10 people, then you can almost guarantee someone will get caught. Um, there is a difference between red team spearfishing and penetration testing spearfishing. Red team, basically, you emulate the attacker and you use spearfishing as a means to an end. So you use spearfishing as a method to get what you want, which is the data or access or whatever. Whereas with red team, with penetration testing, you're testing for a specific thing, such as how susceptible your employees are to spearfishing. So you could have like 100 people being tested, or even everyone in the company. Whereas with red team, you want a much smaller target set, like 5 to 10 or 15 at most, because you don't want to get caught by blue team. So this presentation is mostly going to focus on red team, and it's also going to be black box, meaning that you're an attacker from the outside without any knowledge of how the company works or what they use. So who here has heard of the cyber kill chain? Okay, so quite a few of you. Basically, this is the process that attackers go through when they're trying to hack into your stuff. How spearfishing fits in all this is usually it's used for initial compromise. It's used to get access to the network so they can escalate, become admin. However, it's such a powerful attack vector that you can use it to escalate privileges as well, because if you can phish the admin, then like you have admin privileges. So I'm sure you've heard of Dragonfly or Energetic Bear APT. The Russians trying to hack our national infrastructure or whatever. Basically, they use spearfishing to gain access, and also spearfishing to gain the admin's hash, and then they just crack the hash and they have the administrative privileges. So there are 4 steps in spearfishing. First, you have to do recon. You have to scope out your targets in your environment, what kind of defenses they're using. And then you craft your email, and then you send it, and then you get your shell. And then profit, I guess. So there's all kinds of ways you can get your targets, but LinkedIn is an amazing resource, and you should definitely use it. It's got like all kinds of information, just so much information, and it's all up to date and everything. And the web interface itself is really nice. It includes the options to search by job title in school and all kinds of stuff that's useful. So when you're looking for targets, you want to select people who are not technical. So like people in marketing or whatever, because you don't want to target the people who are technical first, because they're less susceptible to phishing, and also they're more likely to report it. There's no need to target the admins right away because you're looking just to gain access. That's really for the second step. So you want to choose 5 to 15 targets, not too many. There's also this great tool called LinkedIn by Vincent. He did a talk called A Year in the Red or something like that, and it's a really great talk. And basically what this does is it takes information from here, the search results here, and it just scrapes it and puts it in the HTML file so you can search through it locally. And what it can also do is convert names into email addresses. So how that usually works is they have a pattern like first name dot last name at domain. So it can do that. I also created a tool called Hunter Gatherer, which can also do that. It can also do email validation. So it can check to see if an email address actually exists. So that's useful because you have people who have like first names like Michael, but they go by Mike, and then their email address is Mike instead of Michael. So it can do this in two ways. It can do this using the SMTP receipt to command, which is kind of already known, but most mail servers have already patched that, so that may not work. But what does work and what would probably continue to work in the future is bounce emails. So if you send an email to an email address that doesn't exist, you will get a bounce, and then you know it doesn't exist. Another lesser known method is directory calling. So if you call one of their employee locations after 5 when the receptionist leaves, you can press 1 to dial whoever you want. And in some less secure environments, you can press 1 to get a directory listing. So you could get information from there. And another cool thing about bounce emails is that it can leak additional information. People usually have like an auto reply when they're out of office. So not only do you see the name and email of the secretary, you also know the relationship between the two, and you can try to exploit that for social engineering. And you also know that that person is out of office. So now that you have your list of targets, you want to find out what kind of environment the company is using. So what kind of defenses they have, what kind of antivirus, firewall, and all that stuff. So again, LinkedIn is a great source of information. You can search for people who already work there, and then you can find their job descriptions, or you can look for new job positions and see what they're looking for. So here we see that they have Carbon Black, which is a pretty good antivirus. So you want to make sure to set up a lab using those technologies and then try to bypass it. So another thing you can do is you can send the bounce emails, and then sorry, you can send an email to a non-existing address and get a bounce. And a lot of times that will leak some juicy details. For example, here we see that they're using Proofpoint. And not only that, we actually see the score for this exact email. So you can use this to test your actual email and see if it gets categorized as spam. And like this is a pretty big company, so this isn't like a thing that only works in less secure small environments. They do like healthcare stuff, I think. um, so now that you have your environment, you set up your lab, you have everything ready, it's time to create the actual email. So there's all kinds of ways you can do it. Here are some tried and proven ones. Basically, you want to prey on importance, fear, and privilege, as well as urgency. So here we have like some kind of holiday schedule or whatever change. Um, so all employees are worried about things that matter to them, like holidays and salary especially. So those are great things to exploit. Um, you're also you're also exploiting privilege because you're impersonating the director of HR, who may actually send this kind of email and who everyone trusts and loves and everything. So there's all kinds of ways you can do it. You just have to make sure it looks completely legitimate and make sure it contains the right footers and headers. This one is kind of plain. So nowadays, most people use HTML5 footers where they have like green text and a picture of the company or whatever. So this email can probably be improved by adding that. And another thing is if you get a bounce, you also get the footer, so you can steal that. So now that you have your actual email, basically you send the email, it's going to contain a link or attachment that contains your malicious payload. So now it's time to create that payload. There's all kinds of ways to do it. You can have an executable, you can have a JS file, VBS file, but what I really like are Office payloads because people trust them more and people think that there's a less chance of malicious things happening because people send Office documents around all the time and they're less suspicious of Office-based documents. So there's all kinds of ways you can run code using Office. Macros is pretty popular, but nowadays it's getting locked down, so I wouldn't really recommend it unless if you know it works. It can also bypass application whitelisting if they haven't blocked those attack vectors. There's also click once, which only works in Internet Explorer, but as the name suggests, you get this prompt and you click run, and then you can run whatever code you want. But with all of these, you see some kind of security warning that the user has to click through. So you want to try to convince them to click through that. So This here is Cerber ransomware, and as you can see, it's trying to convince the user into clicking that enable content. So you want to trick them into doing that, and then after they do that, if nothing happens, they're going to be like, what the hell, did I just get hacked? So you want to deploy a decoy so they're not suspicious. And you can just steal these templates from actual malware samples. There's all kinds of great sources for that. And generally, when you're doing this, you're going to have to host it on your own domain because you want to track clicks and everything like that. But it's optimal really to host them on third-party file sharing services like Google Drive because those are more often used and they're less suspicious. You can either host it as a link, download link, or an attachment, but I prefer download link because attachments get scanned more often, and they're also getting stripped of their executable content in the case of Office documents. So I couldn't actually find any open source templates for phishing with Office documents. So I decided to create my own. I was inspired by this Cerber ransomware. So it's on my GitHub, and I added some VBA code to deploy a decoy document, and it's all contained in the same document, so it doesn't go out and download anything. So check that out if you want. So basically, you have your document. The user runs the macros, the OLE, or whatever, and then that in turn runs your malicious payload, which gives you your shell. So I'm sure you know what a remote administration tool is. Basically, that's what gives you the shell remotely. So there's all kinds of tools to choose from. Codec is interesting because it's written in JScript, which is a scripting language that's inherent in Windows, but it's not PowerShell. So that's pretty good. There's also Puppy, which is written in Python, and it's got a really great credential dumper. I would highly recommend the credential dumper. The Metasploit and Cobalt Strike is kind of like the traditional one that everyone uses, the most popular one, and it is really effective, so I would definitely recommend that. Um, so here you see the basically how you create a remote administration tool with PowerShell Empire, and you can see like the default values. So basically, in the case of each of these, you want to change that because they're usually not the smartest values. They're not the most stealthy or whatever, and they also contain static strings that could get picked up by antivirus or IDS. So just change all of those things to something better. So here's an overview of all the defenses that you're going to encounter. Basically, the mail is going to come in. It's going to get scanned by the gateway mail antivirus. It's going to be run in a sandbox to determine if it's acting maliciously. And then it's going to get through into the user's inbox. The user is going to download it. And then it's going to get scanned again by the user's antivirus on his or her computer. And then it runs, and then there's going to be IDS systems that's going to be trying to pick up on that intrusion, that compromise. And then finally it goes through the firewall and then you get your shell. So you want to keep in mind all these defenses because if you fail at any of these points, then that could screw up everything. So make sure you don't screw up. So here are some tips for trying to bypass those defenses. You want to blend in with legitimate traffic. So by spear phishing, you're already kind of doing that because you're blending in with legitimate email. That's why anti-spam has a hard time filtering spear phishing messages. There's also the concept of living off the land or using resources that are already available. For example, PowerShell, which is like scripting languages that's used by system administrators for legitimate use, but it can also be used illegitimately. Another thing is you want to stay in memory. So whenever you write to disk, there's the risk of the file being scanned and detected by antivirus. But sometimes you have to write to disk in order to get persistence in case the computer reboots. So you want to keep that to a minimum. Keep everything in memory if you can. And most importantly, you want to set up your lab environment that emulates the actual environment, and you want to test your payload, you want to test your email and everything because not only can you have bugs that would screw it up, you can also get detected. And then if you do get detected, you want to find out why you got detected, and then you want to change it so that it doesn't, or you want to use a different method so that it doesn't get detected. So sometimes it's a lot of trial and error, but eventually you're going to get there. Just about every defense can be bypassed. So here are some more tips for implementing that. You want to be careful with PowerShell. It's not like the Wild West it used to be where you can run PowerShell and there's no defenses whatsoever. You have constrained mode, you have logging, you have ASMI or something, which is like antivirus scanning PowerShell. So I'm not saying don't use it, it's a great tool, but you want to be careful when you use it. And with that said, scripting languages are great because antiviruses, for some reason, have a hard time detecting scripting languages. Um, there's a PowerShell Empire, which has been around for forever, and yet with minor modifications, you can bypass almost all antivirus. So it's pretty effective. And you can also easily obfuscate scripting languages. So what that does is it changes the clear text code into something that's hard to distinguish. So antiviruses can't pick up on it. So here's an example of obfuscated code. There's a script called invoke obfuscation, which is really great. I would recommend it, but it doesn't always work. Sometimes there's some bugs in it, so it's tricky. um, so there's also domain fronting. It's kind of complex, but basically how it works is that you're using a high reputation domain like google.com or cloudfront.net, and then you're proxying your command and control traffic through that into your command and control. So that's really great because on the network, all you're seeing is a bunch of encrypted post requests to Google or CloudFront, and that's hard to distinguish from legitimate traffic. And also what's cool about that is that with SSL stripping, usually they have exceptions for these kind of domains because they're used so frequently. So you're gonna go through you're gonna skip the stripping as well. Another thing you can do is a third-party command and control, like Dropbox has a really great PowerShell Empire has a really great Dropbox module. So you can use Dropbox as your command and control, and that's going to appear similar to the actual Dropbox app that people install. So one thing to be careful there is Dropbox doesn't want you to be using them as command and control. So they're going to be actively looking for your PowerShell Empire based traffic basically. So you want to make sure to change the defaults and make sure you test it so that they don't kick you out. And another thing is PowerShell Empire has this MS Build package. Basically, MS Build is a legitimate Microsoft binary that can get through application whitelisting and also PowerShell constrained mode. So that's definitely a great payload to use because it gets through those two major roadblocks. So here's a great example of all of this being applied in the wild. I believe this is Ocean Lotus APT, but I'm not completely sure. So there's a guy called John Lambert. He's got a great Twitter, so I would recommend following him. So here we have an office document with macros, and then what the macros does is basically it renames W script, which is the thing that runs JScript or VBS, and then it renames that because the defenders could be watching for that specific executable, so that gets through that defense. And then what they do is they use this pub_prn.vbs script, which is a legitimate Microsoft signed VBS script, but there's a vulnerability where you can inject any code you want. So you can run this script and have it run your code, your VBS code. So Enigma tweeted or posted about this. He's also got a great blog. Oops. And another thing that they're using is this thing called .NET to JS. So basically that converts .NET code like C# into JS, which is a scripting language. So again, they're abusing this scripting language thing. But I'm seeing this being detected nowadays, so you might have to modify it. So here are some anti-blue team techniques. Basically, after you bypass all the technical controls, you still have to bypass the blue team, which is like actual people. So they're always trying to find you in your network. They're always trying to kick you out and ruin all the fun. So you want to make sure that doesn't happen. So in less secure, or honestly in most environments, if they get a phishing notification, they're not going to like do advanced reverse engineering or all of that stuff. They're basically going to email everyone that clicked on the link. They can find out who clicked on the link, but they can't find out who actually ran the payload. So they're just going to email them saying, did you run the payload? So the cool thing about that is if you've compromised them, then you have access to their emails. So you can just write an Outlook rule to just block those kinds of emails, and then they're never going to get that notification. So I wrote a PowerShell script to do that called hide phishing notification, which does exactly that. Another cool thing is environmental keying. Basically, what that does is it encrypts your payload, and then it can only be decrypted using certain environmental strings like the domain name or the existence of outlook.exe. So what that does is not only does it bypass antivirus sandboxes, it also makes incident response a lot harder. Um, so like you can have it so that your payload can only be decrypted if it's ran in an environment with the domain of example.com that contains outlook.exe or office.exe or whatever. So there's this cool tool called Sharpshooter, which basically can do environmental keying. It can also do anti-VM detection, basically detect when it's being run in a sandbox and then don't run the malicious code if it is. And it can also create scripting languages that basically run shellcode, so you can have it run Metasploit, Meterpreter, or whatever you want. So it's a pretty great tool, so I would recommend it. Another thing you can do is have separate campaigns. So if you have 20 email addresses, you can divide it into 4 groups of 5 and then have different phishing messages and different payloads for each of them. So it's going to be hard for them to detect each and every one and kick you out for all of them. So now that you have all that ready, it's time to send the actual email. Some things to keep in mind is SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. Those are kind of too complex or too, it'll take too long to explain them, but basically in an email, you have the bounce email address and then you have the from email address. The from is actually where what the user sees, but the bounce is also important. So SPF basically blocks spoofing for that bounce email address, and then DKIM blocks spoofing for the from email address. Now, most companies have already implemented SPF, but there's still a lot of companies that haven't implemented DKIM. So if you know your target company hasn't implemented that, it's a great thing to take advantage of because you can even spoof their own domain and it's going to look completely legitimate. It includes a picture of them and everything. But if they blocked it, then there's nothing you can do about that. You can also use a third-party high reputation SMTP, so like SendGrid or MailChimp or Google or Amazon or whatever. Those services have high SMTP reputation and are less likely to end in spam. And you can also use this tool called mailtester.com to test your emails. Basically, it goes through and checks for common spam things, and it can even scan it through a bunch of anti-spam filters. So you can use this to test how good your payload is. And there's all kinds of ways to actually send the email. But what I really like is GoFish. It's really advanced and it's got all kinds of tools. But really any method is fine. So we're going to do a live demo. So let's hope this works. Whoops. Oh God, I can't see the top part of that. Okay, so we're going to target google.com since they're really good in security and stuff. So here I have LinkedIn, and I'm searching through for people who may be public relations or public policy or whatever. So I just searched up public, and there's all kinds of stuff that shows up, but I've already chose a list from that subset, so I don't have to go through all of that. So here's the list that I created. So these people are going to be targeted. Well, I'm not actually going to target them, but for this example, I'm going to target these people. So now that I have their names, I'm going to convert it to email addresses. So first I got to find out what their pattern is. So to do that, you can just use Google. Okay, so I've searched this guy's name up. As you can see, there's this WikiLeaks thing that contains his email address. And you can see that it's the first letter of the first name and then the last name at google.com. So that's the pattern you can use. Um, So I'm going to use my tool, Hunter Gatherer, to convert those names into email addresses. So here we have our list of email addresses. So those are the people that we're going to send the email to. So what we're going to do is we're going to impersonate the head of HR and say there's some kind of HR change or whatever. Some kind of vacation or schedule change, to be exact. So to find the director of HR, you can either use LinkedIn, or if they're a bigger company, you can just use Google. So we're going to use Google against Google. So there we go. Well, that's actually an outdated one. That guy got replaced by this person. So we're going to impersonate this person. So normally, I would do the bounce emails checking with this to check to make sure that these email addresses are valid. But I don't really have permission to do that, so I'm not going to do that. So with that being said, let's send the actual email. I'm not going to send it to them, obviously, but I'm going to send it to myself. And then we can test the actual payload. The one that you saw earlier, that's on my GitHub. That's what I'm going to use. Okay, so to send the email, I'm using a custom script that I created, but you can use any method. So I'm going to send the email right now to myself. And that is my email address, by the way. All right. So here it is. I already sent it to me before, just in case it didn't work. So I have two of them. So we're going to open it. As you can see, it's got all the right details, and it's got a link to some kind of Google Drive. So we're going to go ahead and download and run this. And we want to open. And what we have here is Kaspersky endpoint protection. So this is one of the best antiviruses, so that's why I chose that one, because I had a hard time bypassing it, but at the end, I still was able to bypass it. So it shows that everything can be bypassed, even if it's really hard. Black Hills actually made a blog about Kaspersky and how hard they are to bypass. And how they did it is they used like an old obscure remote administration tool, but I don't think that's like a truly legit bypass, because you can always create your own remote administration tool and it's not going to get detected because it's brand new. But eventually it will, and there's no point in and then you're going to have to keep creating new ones, so that doesn't work. So I think the trick is to take an existing one that already gets detected and find a way to make it undetected. So that's what I did. And basically what I did, I talked about PUPI, which is written in Python. Basically, I used that, but I used an actual Python interpreter. So I wrote a script to install Python as a user and install all the dependencies and then run PUPI. So it would get caught by application whitelisting, but those are legitimate applications. Python is legitimate and it's not going to get detected by antivirus. So I've already installed it from a previous test, and I didn't want to reinstall it because I don't know how slow the internet here is. It's probably pretty slow. Okay, there we go. So it ran, it deployed the decoy document. I would show you what it looks like on the server. I got a shell and PUPI, but I forgot my SSH password and I couldn't find it, so sorry about that. But on the server, there is a shell. And I can prove that by doing a netstat. Can anyone find Python? I know it's in there. Is it there? Oh, this is too hard. Oh, I know. There we go. Haha, scripting language to rescue. So yeah, as you can see, that's the command and control. It's established the connection there. So unfortunately, I can't show you the actual command and control because I forgot the password. But we know it works and we know it gets through Kaspersky, so that's pretty cool. So back to the presentation. So here are some key takeaways. Do your recon using LinkedIn. It's an amazing resource. And be aware of what the defenses are doing. Make sure you have a lab setup that matches that of your target, and make sure you're testing it all the way. Be sure to test like not only the payload itself, but also the email and everything, because like that could potentially get caught as well. Make sure you're not using the defaults, and don't be afraid to customize stuff. Don't be afraid to go in the source code and change it. Because like when I was doing this, there was all kinds of problems I ran into, not just for Kaspersky, but also other antiviruses. Like Symantec detects long PowerShell commands, so I had to get through that as well. So there's all kinds of roadblocks you have to get through. So here are some remediations for defense. So being aware of phishing, lets you know how to defend against phishing. So users can't get phished with remote administration tools if they can't even run code. So if you prevent their ability to run code, that would greatly reduce the attack surface. You can also train and educate your users and make sure you're testing them, because like just training them is like having a lecture without a test. Like they're not going to actually remember anything. And most of them are probably going to be looking at their phones anyways and not really care. So that's the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
You mentioned with the C2, like third-party C2, does that work with a custom cloud like OwnCloud or something? Or does that not get through like a firewall or anything?
Sure, that would work. As long as you have some kind of API to develop it in. The C2 for Dropbox is, specifically for Dropbox, so you have to create your own whatever adapter, I guess.
Have you noticed better success using an existing service like Dropbox or Google Drive for delivery as opposed to like a type of swatted domain?
Honestly, I've never tried a swatted domain, but there are a lot of defenses against those kinds of attacks. Like, I know for a lot of mature environments, they will block all domains registered in the last 30 days. So I don't see any reason not to use Google Drive or Dropbox, since they're already legit and they're already trusted. But yeah, squad domains, usually you have to use that. So there's a tool called Catfish, which can find squad domains, including ones that are about to expire. So that's a great tool for finding those. All right. Thank you.